Hello everyone, and welcome to our September session of Ask Me Anything. My name is Isabella, and I'm a co-chair of the Women's Network of Student Leaders, and I'm happy to introduce you to today's guest, Nancy House. Nancy has over 40 years of experience as a geophysicist, working for multinational corporations and small independent oil companies. She was also SEG President for 2017-2018 term, being the second woman to serve as an SEG President since the Society's founding in 1930. I'd like to thank you very much, Ms. Nancy House, for being here with us today. And I'll open up for you to, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit more, and then we start the questions.
Thank you, Isabella, for the introduction, and I'm very pleased to be able to contribute to hopefully future of emerging geoscientists. And I would love to see more women being active and productive in this role. I have to say that I have had an extraordinarily rewarding career in geophysics. And I can't think of any better science to be involved in for the past 4 years.
Yes, thank you very much. For everyone who's watching, feel free to send questions on the chat throughout the event that we'll ask for Nancy. But now I'm going to start with some questions. I read a little bit about your history in geophysics and geosciences, and I noticed that you are a daughter of a geologist. And I'm a little bit curious because in my case, I'm first, like, no one else in my family was related to geosciences, and I wanted to know how it was to grow up being in a family with a geoscientist, and if you wanted to pursue this career since the beginning, or if you changed your mind throughout your life.
I would say that for the most part, I didn't know that I wanted to be a geophysicist until fairly late in my college career. It was my last year. And basically I avoided being a geologist or going into geology, even though science was very appealing to me. I have to credit my father for his love of learning that he exhibited all of his life, and the opportunities that being a child of a geoscientist allowed me, because at the age of 4, my father had an opportunity in Bolivia. So he took his wife, who followed him with 4 children under the age of 10, to Cochabamba, Bolivia, from Cody, Wyoming in 1958. So that life was a very rich and rewarding life. And then I came back to the US and attended school speaking perfect Spanish in a state where no one spoke Spanish, and pursued a career in studying. The interesting part is, as I was coming out of high school, I wanted to be an engineer and had an interview arranged with the automotive engineering school, General Motors Institute. And I was highly discouraged by teachers, adults, boyfriends, everybody else, to not pursue an engineering career. So I ended up applying for and receiving a scholarship to teach science in secondary schools, because in the early 1970s, that's what women were perceived as being able to do. You could be a scientist as long as all you ever aspired to was being a teacher. And that's nothing against teachers. I have had some fantastic ones. But when I was again in college, my father had another opportunity, and he he had a contract in Singapore, and he arranged with his company to bring his family over. And that's where I met a couple of bird dogs, which are the people who do the quality control and project management on seismic acquisition jobs. And they suggested that I might be interested in geophysics since I had a background in physics and chemistry and hard sciences. And after I got back to the University of Wyoming, that's when my career pivoted to geophysics. And I have to admit, it was so fascinating and so applied that I never looked back. It's a beautiful science because you can actually see the response of either detonating a charge or vibrating the ground or in introducing an electrical current. You can measure it, where many physical phenomenon you're dealing with phenomenon that are an indicator of something. So you never get to see a neutrino or a quark or even a planet that's 10,000 light years away. So that's what makes geophysics so fascinating and so fun.
I agree that was also what fascinated me in geophysics, being able to see without directly seeing things. So let's go to some other question. Like you said, you grew up in different countries, right? How was this experience for you? Do you think that this probably changed the way you see life and this changed your life? But how it did and how it changed, for example, like you said, your career and how you choose your path, this kind of things.
I agree. I mean, it was instrumental in. I didn't have a clear path all the way through, but I always made choices that led me down to a certain direction, whether it was deciding to be a science teacher because that's where I was getting funding from. And at some point, I realized that that was not the appropriate place for me, and I chose a different path. I worked for nearly 20 years in my career before I got to do my most desired project, which was actually being able to work the foothills of the Andes in southern Peru. So that was at the culmination of my career, where not only had I been identified as one of the emerging technical scientists at Mobile, but I also got a position that allowed me to go back to South America and truly understand and experience that as an adult again. So I've had the great fortune of being to Machu Picchu 5 times in my life, the earliest as a 5-year-old. So it really did allow me perspectives that most people from the US never get. And I think that helps in understanding the nuance of the language. It helps me to understand how negotiations in different countries and different cultures can take different pathways. Like the rules that we use here in the US aren't necessarily the same rules that are used in Nigeria or China or Singapore or any of these places. And without that fundamental understanding, I think it presents many challenges.
True, very interesting. We have a question here on the chat. Hi, Nancy. What's life-work balance for you in your early career?
That was a very, very, very challenging part. I started my career as a single geophysicist, And getting married, even at the eve of my wedding, when I had already done all my academic work and my master's degree and had started a career with my name. So it became an issue culturally. Why aren't you planning on changing your name? So that was one of the early ones, is that I didn't feel like my identity needed to change because I had been married. It didn't reduce my respect for the institution or anything else. So I ended up doing a compromise, which was a hyphenated last name. I was originally planning on returning for a PhD immediately when I got married, and I found that trying to work 8 hours a day, have a married life, I just couldn't commit that level of effort to doing the PhD. So I didn't pursue that early after my marriage. Then 3 years into my marriage, which was carefully chosen, and I'm lucky that I could have that choice, I had a baby, because you had to work at the time 3 years until you were allotted at least 6 weeks off of full pay. Because at the time, the only maternity leave that was recognized in the US corporations was the same leave that you would get for any major medical, which was 6 weeks. Then when your doctor allowed you to come back, then you could come back to work. But when I had my first baby, it was 5.5 weeks, and my boss was required by HR to call me and ask me not when I was coming back, but if I was coming back. So the assumption was that once I had a baby, I would not be interested in working. And I had that given to me many times. So always feeling like I had to achieve more than anybody else to prove that I was truly dedicated to this career and intended to stay in this career was a challenge. The other very intense challenge was finding suitable childcare for a 6-week-old baby, because you really were discouraged from taking any more time off. If you did, you took it off without pay. They did not have to guarantee your job back if you took more than 10 days unpaid leave. And so therefore, you always were under this stress of having to take time off to be a mother. And that was a challenge, to feel like you were giving all that you should give to this baby, and also nurturing a career that you felt was very rewarding and critical to the family's well-being. On top of that, when the children got sick, there was no option for you to take time off to stay home with a sick baby. And often there were no options for it. So you were required to take whatever vacation time you had. And in the US, you had to work at least 5 years before you got more than 2 weeks of vacation. So 10 days is all that you could have. So if your child was sick and you had to stay home, you were eating into your vacation time, which was required. I had a husband who was British. So when we would go to visit his family, it was so expensive that we would want to take the entire time, and often we would delay those trips to when I had accumulated more vacation. So it was a challenge. It was a challenge. And then the long commutes, the stress of being late to pick up children after school, where the caregivers are charging you $10 per minute every minute that you're late, and at the same time feeling the stress of having to achieve more than your colleagues because of your gender and the perception. So, it was not easy, and I'm not going to pretend that it wasn't. I think things have improved some, but it's very easy for them to slide back into where they had been.
You commented that the situation improved with time for women working in companies. How has it improved?
The last major company I worked for was Chevron, and I believe, if I recall correctly, that maternity leave was, you were given the option of up to 1 year at reduced hours and many months of paid time off or half time off of maternity leave with a guarantee of having your job back. So those kind of things have improved. I don't think that there has been any legislation to improve it, and it changes depending on, smaller companies tend to not be subject to the same scrutiny as the larger ones. But the big difference has been the Family Leave and Medical Act, which protects your job if you are forced to take a leave to take care of family members. It's very critical for anybody to understand what those legal help actually gives you. So even going back to when I was having babies, basically you needed to understand, for number one, that they couldn't require you to come back before your doctor said you were physically able, rather than them saying, well, if you're not back at 5.5 weeks or at 6 weeks, then we're going to give your job away. They couldn't do that legally, but it's up to you, the individual, to understand those legal rights. So that's an important thing, and I think that it's changed, and the desire is to change it even more, but that becomes a political question that's hard to get an answer to.
True. No, it's really good to know that it has been changing with time in various countries. It's really good. We have a question from the chat. This question is from Turan. She's also a co-leader of the student committee. And she questions which soft skills you would suggest to develop in the beginning of your career as a fresh graduate.
That's a very good question. Early in my career, I came in and I was very assertive and almost to the point of aggressiveness about what did you think of this and what did you think of that, and how dare you treat me as if I'm not knowledgeable and educated. So I think it's very, very important to learn communication skills, and that means written and oral. And I took some leadership training much too late in my career because I didn't realize that often you ended up with people who they are aggressive and angry, but it's their problem and not yours. So one of the skills that it taught me was really how to put yourself into the position of your supervisor, your management team, and your company, and really understand what they need you to give them in order for the whole entity to succeed. It's very easy to internalize every criticism and internalize every request instead of actually trying to put that into the realm of how you can impact the success of the whole project, the whole corporation, and yourself. So taking that step to really step outside yourself. When you're in a meeting and you make a comment, instead of worrying about how you're saying this and everything else, watch the room, look at the effect, see the people, how they're reacting to your comments, if they're understanding, make sure that you connect with everybody in that room. If there's somebody who's being particularly quiet, maybe actually just acknowledge their presence and ask if they have any additional comments in that way. So those are the soft skills that I would highly recommend, is really focus on how you communicate. And that means listening and not just what you say and how you say it.
Yes, this is a very important soft skill, especially currently that we live in a very worldly job market. I don't know if I can call it like that. So yeah, I have to deal with people from different countries every day. So it's really important, for sure.
Setting, it's much more constructive to ask questions and learn as much as trying to communicate your ideas and trying to change the way people are thinking. So.
True, definitely true. We have another question here on the chat from Sophia. Do you think that women can bring skills in the industry environment that men cannot? And in addition to this, what do you think about the current role of women in companies?
Yes, and not precisely. I think in general, women are more collaborative than competitive, but that may be too much of a generalization that would lead you to almost stereotypical. But one of the suggestions that was made to me by my leadership coach was that what she has observed is that women who are more demure and quiet tend to have more success than others. But other than just tending to be a little bit more collaborative, I would say not specifically. I think that's kind of getting down to the recognizing that there are fundamental differences in men and women, but it should not affect their ability to contribute in a constructive way.
Yes, I find it funny that you said that you consider that women are more collaborative than men in some cases, but it's interesting that in media, women are represented as being competitive with each other.
Well, and I mean, and you can't say that every woman has the need to bring up other women. I mean, there are instances where some women, having struggled to achieve their success, they see other women as competition. But I wouldn't say that's a gender thing. It is more to do with individual personalities and the desire, whether it's on a PhD committee where I suffered to achieve my PhD, so therefore you will suffer as much, and everybody who gets one from me will suffer that much. So, I don't like to put too much to gender specific things. So.
True. It's more like to the person than to his gender. It varies a lot, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, you commented about some difficulties that you had during your career, including having a child in a time that you didn't have much time to have a license, lease. How does it call
Leave,
it?
leave.
A leave. Sorry. And also like being a woman in general in the industry. But I wanted to ask you if you find other difficulties also, like you said, to carry a PhD. Did you remember having other difficulties during your career that changed you and left like a mark in you?
This one is challenging because there were. I mean, when I started in the industry, it was the late 1970s, and they had just passed a law called Title IX, and it was aimed at having equal opportunities for women in sports and colleges, but it transformed almost all industries. So that meant that in a company you had to have a certain percentage of women in the professional and technical ranks, which on one hand gave me opportunities as a woman leaving Colorado School of Mines with a master's degree in geophysics compared to somebody else who didn't have those credentials. So it opened many doors. But there were still people who would stop by my office and inform me that my name with a hyphen, a house finch, was not a legal name and that I couldn't have that as a name. I had certain bosses that, because of their personal religion culture, could not acknowledge that I had any contributions to make. That said, I like the analogy of being water running down a stream and coming around a boulder in some rapids. You find an easier path around it. So often I had to wait. This is some very good advice my father gave me early in my career. He said, Nance, as long as you're working at a large company, there is only one thing that's guaranteed. Whether you love what you're doing or whether you are miserable in a job, the only thing that's guaranteed is things will change. So sometimes you had to be the instigator of that movement around whatever was blocking your progress. And sometimes you literally just had to get out of that stream. So there were times, but I usually, in order to have success, I usually had a boss who had put his daughter through medical school, was one of them. Another one was someone who was from a different culture who had 4 daughters. So it just meant that they were more open to listening to me as an intellectual with ideas to give versus a woman that they could not even see beyond me opening my mouth. And it was very hard sometimes when I could watch somebody's eyes literally glaze over or totally ignore a suggestion that I had made in a meeting until it came out of somebody else's mouth. And those were not easy times, but you still had to maintain your dignity and allow everybody else to maintain theirs and still try to achieve what you needed to get done.
Yeah, I can even imagine how complicated it was, and even until it still is, right? But thankfully, it's getting better. Sure. I thought about we uh, changing a little bit the subject. Talk about your experience with SEG. Right, you have been acting with SEG for almost 4 years now, correct? So I would like to say to ask, how do you think SEG, being a member of SEG and an active member of SEG during all those years, impacted your career?
At the very beginning of my career, I was fortunate enough to be at a school that was very heavily engaged in SEG. So as a graduate student, everybody got $100 to pay for their way to go to the conference. And we were advised that if we didn't come out of there with a job, that we were doing something wrong, because it was also the time where geophysicists were critical to most oil exploration companies, and it was a charmed time. And even at my first annual meeting that I went to at SEG, it was so exciting. I walked through a Western geophysical booth, and one of the gentlemen there greeted me with tears in his eyes, saying, "I remember seeing you in Bolivia when you were 4 years old." So, I mean, it was just that continuity. So being exposed to some of the industry greats that you had, read books from or everything else, you were just in awe of the amount of knowledge that was collected in this informal setting. So that was my earliest one. And then SEG would put on some very low cost courses. So early in my career, where my thesis work had little to do with being an interpretation geophysicist. So I had a lot to learn, and it was important to have an easy way to achieve that. So in addition to in-house courses, which took a lot of resources for each of these companies to come up with, the fact that SEG would put on a distinguished short course for one day, and you would have the equivalent of 1 week of one of the industry greats to learn about something like deconvolution, or it was really important in terms of laying a strong technical foundation for me to continue with my job. And then when I moved to mobile, it was part of the conversation when I was hired that they were trying to just diversify their workforce with fully qualified professionals and expected a certain level of leadership. So when opportunities came up to be on, like they used to call it the International Affairs Committee, which transformed into the Global Affairs and different committees, then you became part of not just receiving what SEG had to offer to help you in your career, but you could also participate in changing the structure and bringing in a more global aspect of it. So, those were some of the things that got me involved. And then as a result, I wanted to actually publish some of my work. And SEG was a good way to do it. At first, there was such a competitive proprietary nature of a lot of the work that you did that the only way you could present it was to do it in a verbal presentation that was not published and could not be used by other people as easily. So I became more and more interested in sharing the knowledge that I had and some of the groundbreaking technologies that we were working on. And my colleagues, it was so exciting to come up with new things and try new things and be able to communicate them to other people. And then as a result of that, people started to ask if I would be interested in leadership roles. And they came from first a local society, and then got tapped to be a general chair for one of the annual meetings. And that way I learned a great deal about how our organization is structured. And that's an important part of professional organizations. You can't, I think it's a mistake to come in with ideas for change, which is good, but without understanding how to make that change. You end up sometimes redundant workflows and parallel workflows within different parts of the organization. So that's how I think that it helped me from the early part of my career to the culmination, which was towards the end of my career, to actually have the honor of leading that organization for a short time.
Yes. So how continue on this idea, like you said, do you think that being a member of SEG um, gave you more opportunities to having leadership roles, or this is related to your job as in a company? But do you think SEG helped you in this part?
You know, I think it should have helped me, but I'm not sure that it actually did. It just depends. I think it helped me to mature as a professional, to be exposed to leaders other ways. My ability to lead a company came later in my life, and maybe it was because I had assumed some additional responsibilities and understood how to do something as simple as expect outcomes from a meeting. Don't just meet for the sake of meeting for groupthink or whatever, but actually have objectives of that meeting and what you want to achieve. You know, I have a great deal of admiration for some of the women that I've seen who have really achieved true leadership, like Vicki Hollub with Oxy, who is their CEO, and she's taking the company in a much more progressive direction than I think might have been otherwise. And I did not achieve that. So my one year as SEG president is probably the culmination of many years of work towards SEG.
Yes. Uh, Changing a little bit again the topic that we are talking currently. What areas in geophysics do you think, or in geosciences in general, do you think are being more relevant currently? Like what type of, like you spoke about soft skills, they are good for new recent graduates and students, but which hard skills do you think would be good, and which areas do you think the students should pursue, of course, besides the ones that they want to?
Okay. This is kind of a very dear topic to me. Often in resumes, they want to know what software you can run, but without the fundamental science behind that software, you are becoming just a button pusher. So I think that it's very critical that one understands the foundation of our science, geosciences, geophysics, geology, physics, that there's a certain fundamental knowledge that it doesn't change from year to year or millennia to millennia. And I feel that geosciences, as we go forward, are going to be critical at learning how to more effectively and efficiently use the resources of this planet that are limited. Like water, there's the best way to locate where water resources are and to map the pollution plumes from some of our more detrimental activities is through use of geophysics. Geophysics is also critical in understanding a reservoir. And if you need a place to sequester CO2, the same skills that it takes to be a good reservoir geophysicist and reservoir engineer, they haven't changed in 40 years. Our ability to manipulate that data and create a myriad of models has improved as computing and technology has improved. But the fundamental science of how much CO2 can you sequester in a carbonate reservoir, that is fundamental fact that doesn't change. What improves is our ability to not just measure it and use it, but we also have to be able to learn how to communicate that to the general public in a way that's understandable and not condescending or threatening in any way.
Yes, geosciences will be they continue to be extremely relevant in the future, right? I also wanted to know how is your owner of a company currently, right? How is it? How is it to be an owner of a company? And also, I would like to link with what you said before. Like, do you think that all the experience with leadership that you had throughout your life culminated in this experience that you're having currently?
Yes, it is. And the company that I have now is actually, it came out of many, many, many years. And finally, when my last job for somebody else ended, it was really the culmination of how to do interpretation geophysics the way it should be done. And that means honoring all the data licensing agreements, that is honoring the science. And it's also being able to communicate that to a non-geophysically adept or literate audience. So, and I had some ideas of how to make geophysical data accessible to small companies who literally would see the cost of, and the expense of doing it themselves. And either they did it cheaply and the results were poor, therefore geophysics was never used again, or they didn't do it at all because the perception was that it couldn't be done in a way that was monetarily effective for their company. So I came up with some business ideas which utilized some of the additional work I had done in economics and risk analysis to try and make that accessible to them. So it hasn't been easy, but I think that philosophy, it resulted in probably the most lucrative contract that I had. And it was, unfortunately, it came in just as I was assuming my role as president. So I brought in another colleague, and that was critical, is to be able to share that project with somebody who was a little more task driven than I am. So, bringing in and sharing it with that. But you also have a lot of details that aren't fun to deal with, like you must have liability insurance for working with some companies, and trying to navigate how much that costs and what that's doing is difficult. So
It's very cool, like having this different perspective, because I think most people that are watching, they are recent graduates or just beginning their careers. So it's amazing to see like how much you have lived and how much you have uh, done throughout your career and your life, and also get inspired I would like to ask you, like, you already gave some tips related to soft skills and also hard skills for someone that is starting their careers, but what other tips do and other ideas would you give for everyone watching? Like, if they want to follow your path, for example, which tips would you give to them?
Um, one of the critical skills that some people call flexibility, I call sense of humor. Um, you have to have the ability to not take yourself so seriously that things defeat you. I would say learn your basic science well and keep the integrity of your science in every aspect of what you do. Work hard. Uh, and learn how to effectively communicate with other people. And that means listening as well as being able to formulate your ideas and communicate them in a way that other people can listen to and achieve.
Yes, very good. I mean, work hard is always a might, right? And also what you said related to like I said, in this answer, and also previously related
Yeah.
uh, to communication. Like, this is really hard to know if other people are understanding what you're trying to say to them.
Yes.
I would like to. We don't have more questions on chat. If you everybody that's watching want to send another question, feel free. But I like to kind of close in it to ask you if I did, me and also the public, if we didn't ask some question that you think we should have asked you, what would it be?
Um, I think that your initial questions covered all of it, and I just want to pass on that no, it has not been easy to be a woman in a man's world, but I wouldn't have changed any part of it. It's been a fantastic career. The science is great, and that makes being passionate about it very, very easy. So the the wrong reason to get into geoscience is for the money, and I saw a number of people who didn't succeed because they were in it because you got good pay. Um, and I think going forward that maybe some of that boom and bust of working in the oil industry may go away. I would hope that if if you do lose a job and you are laid off or fired, to get yourself together, figure out what you could have done differently, and whether or not that is something that you can be passionate about. Maybe it was a good thing that you got fired because you really weren't giving all that you should. And you really didn't believe in the science or what the particular job was trying to achieve. So I would just say follow your passions, be passionate about what you're doing, and enjoy your life, enjoy the career. You know, a lot of people have jobs, but geoscience, you don't go to bed and not be a geoscientist. You don't drive down the highway without having that fundamental understanding of why those mountains are there, or you know what's happening, the processes in the ocean, or how to measure this. Understanding how measurements are made and statistics is critical to going forward. as a culture and as a human race, I believe.
Geoscience is a lifestyle more than a career, right?
That's right. Yeah, it is. It is a life choice, I think.
Yeah, I hope that all of us in the future see life like you said. Like it was hard, but I don't regret anything because I think we are always afraid of doing the wrong choices, right? And I hope that in the end, not the end, but uh, we look back and think like this, like yes, it was a good journey. In the end.
Yes. My ex-father-in-law had a saying about choices that he never made an incorrect choice. He just made a choice, and that puts you on a path. You know, and a very important concept that I internalized a little bit too late was that what is in the past is in the past, and you need to let it go, and you only have one direction to go, and that's forward. And yes, things have happened that weren't good, and choices could have been different, but you are on the path you are on now. You can't go back and change that path, so you might as well figure out what the best path from here forward is.
Yes, and I'd like to thank you very much for your time because sharing your life experience with us also like help us to having this like choosing more wisely and the path that we're gonna follow through life. I'm gonna start closing the session. I'd like to thank you very much for participating, and I'd like to open up for you to give a closing speech if you like.
All right. I just want to thank you again for this opportunity to share some of the wisdom that I hope that I've gathered after a very long and rewarding career. And honestly, I think back to the first 3 years when I was becoming a geophysicist, and they seem like yesterday. So I would strongly hope that everybody who watches this can gain a little bit of hope and anticipation for future that is full of education, knowledge, interaction, and contribution to society in a positive way.
Yeah, thank you very much. And in a positive note, right? We have all our lives in the future, and we can do so much. Thank you very much again for being here with us today, Nancy.
Okay, if there's nothing else, then I will sign off now, and thank you again for this opportunity, and I hope to hear from people soon.
If you want to say a little bit more, it's okay. But for now, for the public, bye bye.
Okay, bye.